Hey guys, Barbara here. Let's start your Google Sheet formula journey. I used to shy away from spreadsheets, and the thought of them used to cause me real anxiety. Unfortunately, this is the case for so many people. I am here to tell you that you don't need to be scared of a spreadsheet. In fact, you should love a spreadsheet. The formulas we focus on in this video are focused on building effective markbooks. However, that does not mean that these formulas will not apply to you. We also cover the basics you need to know when using formulas for the first time, like absolute values and understanding ranges. The formulas that we cover are the following: the average formula to calculate the average results, adjusting decimal values, calculating percentages, converting marks from one total to another, the ifs formula to convert grades to letter grade, the CountIf formula to calculate how many of a certain item appear, the Concatenate formula, which will take text that appears in two separate columns and merge them into one, the split formula, which will take text from one column and split it into two. We speak about them in a markbook context, but they can be applied in many ways. Using spreadsheets will help you to understand and make sense of your data in so many different ways. It will do all the calculating for you, and you can use it to create dynamic visuals in no time. Let's get you set up.
Here we have an example of a gradebook in Google Sheets. Let's start at where we find functions. On the top of your toolbar, you will see this icon over here. This is your Sigma icon. When you click on it, all the functions you have access to in Google Sheets will be made available. At the top of this drop-down are your most commonly used functions, like your sum, which calculates a total, the average, the count function, which will count the amount something appears in a selected range, and your max and min functions. Here we have 4 test scores. In order to determine the average achieved over all the 4 tests, the average function will be used. In order to activate a function in Google Sheets, use the equal sign. When I start to type in the words average, you will notice that a number of options appear for me to select. I'll choose the basic average. One of the things that I love about Google Sheets is that it gives you this help every step of the way. Notice how this little pop-up window has appeared. Google is guiding you in what you need to do. Here, they show you what the function looks like in completion. They will give you a completed example to see an application, and then tell you what this function will actually do. You will notice that when I select the average function, my brackets opened. This is where the action for the function will be written. Now that I am inside the brackets, Google will highlight that field that you need to complete next. For example, at the top over here, it tells me to add in a value. Here, it will show me an example of what that value needs to look like, and at the bottom, it will state what the value is. It's the first range that needs to be considered when calculating the average value. On our sheet here, for example, that range is from Test 1 to Test 4. Test 1 appears in cell C2, and the last test appears in cell F2. This will be my range. A range is always separated by a colon. If you had another range you wanted to add, you can do that too. Just separate the two ranges by a comma. I don't need another range here, so I will finish this off by closing my bracket. Your function is ready to run. Simply hit Enter. Your first average is now completed. You do not need to repeat these steps for every single row. You can simply drag this function down to the last entry and it will automatically calculate those averages. Alternatively, if you don't feel like dragging this function down, you can use this little blue square that appears at the bottom right-hand corner of the cell. If you double-click on that blue square, that function will be dropped down to the very last cell that this data has to pull from. Handy, right? You can use the average function to calculate the average sales targets, average cost, and more. You can use it on pretty much any numeric data. These averages have 2 decimal places. If you don't want a decimal place, you can use these 2 options over here. This will increase and decrease your decimal point. Highlight your range and use it as you need. If you want to calculate a class average for each test, use the same function at the bottom of each column. Activate your function with the equal sign, type in your average and your range. Then drag that function to automatically calculate the averages of the other columns. Unfortunately, double-clicking on this little blue square only works when you are dropping a function down, so will not work here. You can do great things with this data, like add in conditional formatting to automatically highlight students that are achieving below 50%, or highlight those that are achieving higher than 80%. We have a video on how to use conditional formatting, so I recommend that you give it a go. If you want to visualize your students' results, you can add in a chart. It will give you a nice visual indication of how they are doing. We have a video on how to insert and customize these charts. Here we have some results for a test that was out of 40. You can use your basic maths rules to work out things like percentage. This is when you simply apply a written formula. Here we want to know what the percentage is that the students achieved.
In order to do this, activate that you are going to perform a calculation with your equal sign.
Now instead of doing 35 divided by 40 times 100, rather make a reference to a cell. This way, you can drag that formula down to calculate each one of these. For example, I'll type in A3 divided by 40 times 100. Notice that the multiplication sign here is a little star icon and the divide is the backslash. Double-click your little blue square and each percentage is now automatically calculated. Notice that as I move down the row in my formula preview window, you will see that each cell's referencing has changed. This is going to make your calculations faster than ever before. Here we need to determine what the mark is that was marked out of 40, but now it needs to be out of 25. Again, use your equal sign to indicate that Sheets is going to perform a calculation. Use the cell as your initial reference, so equals D3 divided by the current total, and then multiplied by the new total. When you hit enter, the calculation will be performed. Double-click on your little blue square to drop it down, and then clean up those decimal places.
Using functions to help you automate these calculations is going to save you so much time. This is why it is imperative to start keeping track of your marks in digital gradebooks. These digital gradebooks will provide insight to your students' achievements. It will also save you from needing to sit with a calculator to work all of this out. Let's have a look at how to convert marks into letter grade.
Here we have a mark book where the average has already been calculated, but these averages now need to be converted into letter grade. In this case, we are going to use a function known as the ifs function. Let's focus on what the completed function looks like. See how the function begins with the equal sign, and then the function is used and brackets are opened. You will see that what is stated here is that the function begins with if cell H2 is greater than or equal to 80, that is the first statement, so it will be separated by a comma. Then what action needs to take place will appear next in inverted commas. So if it is greater than or equal to 80, then an A needs to appear in the cell. If the option states that H2 is greater than or equal to 70, a B needs to be returned. You will continue like this all the way to the end of what your mark structure would be. Remember to separate each one by a comma so that they stand independently. Hit enter and your letter grade will be returned. Double-click on the blue square and all the calculations will be automatically performed. Not so bad, right? You don't only need to use this for letter grades, you can use it for anything. Here you can see an example of a dataset where we have a number of different clients with their total revenue. The ifs function has been used to determine if the client is a top client, a mid client, or a low client. Notice how it states that if the total revenue is greater than or equal to 3,000, it equals top. If the revenue is greater than or equal to 1,501, it is a mid client. And if the revenue is less than or equal to 1,500, then it needs to return low in its place. See how this ifs function can be used in so many different ways?
If you want to use a formula to calculate how many A's, B's, and C's, etc. have been achieved, you can use a formula to calculate that too. Something that is important to understand before doing this is that each time a formula is dragged down, it automatically changes and adapts the cell that it refers to. If you want to ensure that your formula is always pulling from a very specific range, you will include a $ to the range itself. Adding in a $ will make it an absolute range, which means it will basically lock your formula to that range only. Let's have a look.
The function that we will use now will be the CountIf function. We want to count how many times A appears. The function is activated and the brackets are opened. Now, the range we want counted is this range over here, from I2 to I23. If an A appears in that range, we want it to be counted. In order to prevent any counting from anywhere else, we will add a $ before the column I, and then the range start of 2. Add in your colon, and then lock your range to I23 by adding the $ before the I and the 23. Now tell the function what it needs to count. In this case, it needs to be A. Remember to add this in inverted commas. Close your brackets and hit Enter. All the A's that appear in that range will now be counted. When you drag this function down here, it will be counting the A's. Therefore, be sure to double-click into your cell and change the A to a B. Each one of these will now be calculated for you. No more counting each one and then recounting to make sure that you got it right. Again, you can apply this to any data that you have. Simply apply the same rules where you refer to the cell, give the range, and state what needs to be returned.
The final thing I want to show you is how to join a name and surname into one column if they have been separated across 2 columns. I will also show you how to do the opposite and separate them if the name and surname appears in one column. Let's check this out.
In order to take a name and surname field that appears in 2 separate columns and join them into one column, you will use the concatenate function. Start with the equal, type in concatenate, and open your brackets. Select the cell that the first name appears in and add in a comma. Then select the surname and close the brackets. You will notice that your name and surname has now been merged as one, where you actually need a space to appear between the two. In this case, double-click into the cell to edit the function. After the A2, add in a space in between inverted commas, and then add in your comma to indicate that you are done. When you hit Enter now, the first name and surname will be separated by a space. Double-click your little blue square, and that function will be dropped down to the last cell that has data to pull from. I'll copy this so that I can show you how to split them out. You will notice that if I try to paste it now, nothing will happen. This is because it's copying the function. If you want to copy and paste something that has been made using a function, right-click and choose Paste Special and paste values only. This will leave the function behind and only paste those values. Now, in order to split this out into 2 separate columns, use the split function. Type in equals and then split. Open brackets. Choose the cell with the data that you want to split, followed by a comma. The next thing you will need to tell the function is what it is that is separating the words. In our case, the name and surname is separated by a space. So in between your inverted commas, add in a space and close your bracket and hit Enter. Your name and surname will now be separated into 2 columns. Double-click on your little blue square that has the function and all the names will be separated out. How handy is that?
Using functions will help you to automate so many aspects of your work. I hope that you feel more empowered to move away from capturing your students' results on paper and you start to use Google Sheets to visualize your data more effectively. Be sure to watch the videos on visualizing data with Google Sheets, data validation, filter and filter views, and conditional formatting. All of these can be applied to your markbooks as well as help you work with that data.